It's no secret that Western society has been on a decline when it comes to morality and what we would call Christian virtue ethics. When Elvis Presley was gyrating his hips, it was considered controversial in 1956. We now see culture celebrating the Ice Spices and Cardi B's of the world as they're twerking almost fully nude. There was a time when the presidents would promote prayer and going to church.
It would be a welcome reminder to every American family. We can pray a good deal more at home. We can attend our churches with a good deal more fidelity.
And now, church is looked at as oppressive and bigoted.
I'm a person of faith. I don't talk about it that much. I don't wear it on my sleeve. I always sort of mistrust people who wear it too much on their sleeve.
And this shift rapidly grew through the hippies, free love era, and was later perfectly encapsulated in an innocent movie that is actually strong with satanic undertones. Pleasantville was a movie from 1998 that was a massive cultural icon and cult classic film. It rode the train of calling good evil and evil good. A movie that was celebrated in the 90s for its once innocent and fun portrayal of the culture leaves most Christians sick to their stomach now knowing where that movie landed us just 25 years later. But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. Sometimes that requires us leaning into hard conversations about topics that we don't feel comfortable talking about. So if you're new here, or if you're not new here, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. There's a huge percentage of people that watch this channel, unfortunately, are not subscribed. Pleasantville follows two siblings who enter a 1950s TV show, played by Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, where their modern influences causes the black and white world to turn to color and break free from traditional values. And this change symbolizes the shift from conformity to personal freedom, challenging the place of old-fashioned values and morality. So this movie, even though it comes off very innocent, actually is highlighting how these different characters are staying in black and white until they start dabbling in things like sexual immorality and letting themselves go to find enlightenment and freedom. The majority of those scenes are about things like minors in high school who are starting to explore their sexuality and hooking up. And frankly, they're just not really appropriate to show in this video. But there is one scene I did want to highlight, which takes a way more sinister turn than just people who are underage doing things they shouldn't be doing outside of God's design. This next scene, in my opinion, is a direct attack on the bedrock of our society as we know it. Okay, so this is the scene of the dad in the movie. He's coming home. You notice everything's in black and white. That's kind of the theme of this movie. He comes in, he says, "Honey, I'm home." And the wife is not home. So he says, "Honey, I'm home." And then the lightning happens right behind him. He's confused. His wife's not home. Where is she? She's a good homemaker. He says it again. She's not there. Where is the wife, you ask? Well, she's getting painted by the man she's having an emotional affair with. And notice, as she's getting painted and she's in this situation she has no business being in, she's all of a sudden putting on color. It's no longer about being a square and loving your husband. Now she's progressive. Now she's liberated because she doesn't have to be conformed to the patriarchy and the strict rules around being in a monogamous heteronormative marriage. So something that starts out as people wanting to be free thinkers and wanting to not conform turns into minimizing the reality of an emotional, adulterous affair. She is beyond being a homemaker and stay-at-home mom. She needs something more. She needs to go explore something else. This is the age-old calling evil good and good evil, because the way that evil is dramatized in this movie is that it's colorful, it's vibrant, it's beautiful. And the way God's ways are depicted in the movie is it's black and white, it's boring, it's mundane. And so this all culminates to a scene in the movie where they're in a courtroom and the people who are in color, because they've colored outside the lines, are now on trial amongst the good Pleasantville folks that are still in black and white. So as Tobey Maguire is scolding the judge for being too uptight, check out what happens and see if you can catch the significance here. Either that behavior must stop at once, but see, that's the point. It can't stop at once because it's you, it's in you, and you can't stop something that's inside of you. It's not inside of me. Oh, sure it is. No, it is what you want to do to me right now. Come on. everyone is turning colors. Kids are making it out in the streets. No one is getting their dinner. Hell, you could even have a flood at any minute. Pretty soon, the woman could be going off to work while the men stayed home and cooked. Now, he gets mad, and he said, that is not going to happen. And look what happened. He gets mad, and he turns to color. He goes from traditional values and traditional roles to now he is in color. And then he grabs a mirror and shows him that he has now turned in color himself. He's ecstatic about this. The judge is upset. And this is a big deal. He runs out because he can't believe that he just became like the rest of the town. Now, what sets the scene apart is this isn't just glorifying being open and curious. This is highlighting negative emotions like rage as a good thing, as a thing that causes you to be enlightened. It highlights the most primal, basic instincts that we have as people, to be sexually immoral, to be curious, to be angry and vengeful as good virtues and values. Now, check out this clip from my pastor, Pastor Jeff Moores, over at Rhythm Church here in Oceanside, California, about how 25 years later, this sort of thinking in the 90s has done a number on culture, and specifically the most important union in culture, which is marriage.
The 1940s and 1950s, if you see that, there's Rosie the Riveter right there. You see that during the war, women went off to work in order to help with the war efforts, and many people, they get married super young at this time. They get married before they ship off. They don't really know each other, but they come back, and now they come back to different social dynamics, meaning there's more women in the workplace. Soldiers are coming back with PTSD, trying to figure out how to manage their emotions and what's taking place. And so at this time, you actually see that people begin just to get divorced.
So that's the beginning of the shift that we're starting to see. Now, remember, Pleasantville is highlighting the 1950s. This is when a lot of our modernity and the movement towards modernism and enlightenment starts. It's a post-war change. Why? Well, because men went off to war, women had to stay back and work, and it disrupted in the entire society as we knew it. Now, this was the beginning. It actually gets substantially worse as we go on to the next era. Check this out.
The commitment begins to separate. And then we have the sexual revolution and legal reforms of the 1960s and 1970s. It promotes a very liberal view of sexuality and relationships. And during this time, birth control becomes like more widely available. So it's okay to be more promiscuous outside of marriage without any of the consequences. Families can they have more planning within it. And legal reforms such as no-fault divorce, meaning you can just divorce, there's no fault divorce, was actually first introduced in California, by the way, in 1969. Made divorce easier. You can just leave them now.
Anyone that's a student of society and culture will tell you that the biggest rift that we saw in terms of tension on the family and the divorce numbers going up was when no-fault divorce laws were introduced and the technology provided more birth control. Once those two things were introduced, society and specifically marriages really started to struggle because it made it easier than ever to get divorced without no real reasons to needing to get divorced. And it allowed the restraining of family. It no longer was just the rhythm method and women tracking their cycles. Now they had a plethora of things that they could do to restrain having children, like birth control. And then obviously this is when we see the legalization of the deletion of babies. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is around that same time this sort of stuff is starting to really take off, and Roe v. Wade and things like that are being fought for.
Then we see in the 1980s, 1990s, a redefinition of gender roles. Meaning that no longer is it the breadwinner homemaker model. Instead, you have these now yuppies, these young urban professionals. And if you see them there, they're like he's business, ready to go. You know, she's all about it too. Not only is she a businesswoman, but she's got her running shoes on because she's going to exercise. She's got a Sony Walkman. Come on, somebody who wants a Sony Walkman. Come on, rewind. So you have all that going on. They're both pursuing all of it. And during this time too, attitudes towards premarital sex and cohabitation and single parenthood are just more and more acceptable. It's more and more the norm. If you were raised during this era, you might remember being what we were called latchkey kids, where you just kind of got to raise yourself because your parents were both at work, or your single mom was working, or whatever it was. You just kind of you showed up when you wanted to. You made your own breakfast. You made your own dinner. All of it.
Yep. I mean, that was absolutely my upbringing in terms of my mom was a single mom. She had to work. I was on my own. Had to figure it out. Feed myself. Microwavable pizzas in the freezer. and whatever else I could eat at school. And then that was a lot of times dinner for me, right? Like I don't remember dinners. I don't remember, lunches, breakfast, like all the stuff my wife does for my kids now. I didn't have any of that stuff, which is crazy to think about. And one of the things in the movie Pleasantville that they talk about is her no longer needing to cook dinner. Like cooking dinner, making food was this bad thing that, is so oppressive to women. It's crazy.
And then now here we are, 2000s to present. It's just the redefinition of marriage and family structure altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage has undergone fundamental changes. Legal recognition of same-sex marriage shifts towards individual fulfillment and acceptance of all alternative family structures have reshaped marriage significantly. Millennials and Gen Z are actually marrying later and later because they prioritize their career.
Mm-hmm.
They have different goals. There's hookup culture. You can now just meet someone for a night via an app. Interestingly enough, they did over the last 50 years that people used to find their spouse from friends, family, organizational structures such as work or church. Now all of that's flipped. That's actually lower, and people meet online all the time now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the #1 place where people meet. Nothing wrong with that, but just quite interesting. So we're just seeing less value and importance now given to marriage. Marriage in general is on the decline. In the year 2000, 8.2 marriages per 1,000 people was the ratio. Now, in 2020, it's 5.1 marriages per 1,000 people.
Jeez.
It's dropped. Rising divorce rates still continue to go up. They say all marriages 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. Some studies suggest that rate is now steadied or declining, but that's due to people just not getting married. People just choosing not to.
Yeah, and that's also caused massive drops in birth rates. People not getting married, people getting married later, and there's a plethora of reasons for that. Some of them being economic, some of them being career-driven, ambition-driven, some of them being they can't find a suitable spouse. I see that a lot when we talk about these conversations in our chats. People can't find someone that they deem as dateable or be found by someone they deem as dateable. So it's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing play out in relationships and marriage today.
The idea of monogamy is on decline because for a while there, especially in the early 2000s and 2010s, was like, well, but it's okay because we're monogamous. It's just us and no one else. But right now, monogamy is on the decline. Polygamy, meaning multiple spouses at once. A Gallup poll found in 2003 that 7% of Americans said polygamy was morally acceptable. By 2020, the numbers increased to 20%.
Jeez. So 1 out of 5 Americans now think that polygamy is good. And of course, Pastor Mike Winger did a whole video on the Christians claiming that polygamy is good and that polygamy is God's design for stuff, right? And so you're seeing this just completely change the landscape of what marriage means in society now. Multiple
wives or multiple husbands. I cannot imagine that. That would be like, how could you handle more than one of me? You couldn't. It'd be exhausting.
So needless to say that this sort of stuff has been sneaking into our society for decades. And there's been a lot of reasons for it. It's not one singular reason, but all the reasons at the end of the day end up hurting people, specifically hurting children. And then hurt children grow up and they end up having children. And we have generations and generations of people who were brought up in broken families and are then continuing in this cycle. And it really does take a supernatural touch of God, in my opinion, to change these trends. All of this we see highlighted in its root with this passage, which is Isaiah 5, chapter 20, that says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." And so as we're consuming media, as we're consuming different movies, the most dangerous part about some of these things like Pleasantville and a lot of the stuff that's happening in the music today is that it's doing exactly what Isaiah is describing. It's calling evil good and calling good evil. It's trying to make it playful. It's trying to make it empowering. It's trying to make it light. It's trying to make it funny. But at the end of the day, it's saying that the things that have built society and civilization, like the family, like a mom and a dad in the home raising their biological kids, it's saying, oh, those things are bad. They're outdated. They're old-fashioned. And then all of these other things that start off as pointing to the exception to the rule or tragedy, like a single mom or someone that has a blended family, which all of those things, like blended families, single moms, those are the byproduct of tragedy, of divorce, of things that aren't the way they were intended to be. And so we look to those exceptions to the rule and we say, oh, look, these things work, so those things should be the standard. No, they shouldn't. Single moms are a tragedy. People who are widowed are a tragedy. People whose marriage ends in adultery, that is tragic. That is not the way it should be. And so just because those things should work, that doesn't mean that those are the things we should be highlighting and celebrating. People can overcome the odds, absolutely. But when we make the exception to the rule, and we celebrate it, like a mom that chooses to stay at home for a season, like fathers who choose to be the breadwinner, like nuclear families where both parents are in the home, these things get mocked and it's all deteriorating society. And ultimately, the root of it is it just people don't know God. They don't know Jesus. They haven't had an encounter. And so my perspective on this would be, I think if us as followers of Jesus make sure that we prioritize working out our own salvation with fear and trembling as God is doing a work in us to desire him, and we're living out his ways. We first start with our immediate families and our homes and our actions, and then that extends to our extended families and then our local church communities and then the community at large. But the reality is we're in this world. We're here. Yes, it's a pit stop before we get to heaven. It's not the final destination, but we are called to live in a way that glorifies God by our actions. We are called to live in a way that blesses God. And again, that is the exact theme of our brand new collection called Among the Pagans. It's available right now. Go to blessgod.shop, hit the link in the pinned comment to get yours now before it goes away. And be sure to check out this video right here for more on this topic. I'll see you over there, all right? Peace.